Emmett's like one of the few babies who actually has two webinars all about him. These will go in your online baby book.
He's a breastfeeding celebrity.
Yes, yes, he is. All right, so let's get started. Welcome everyone to IsisParenting's Breastfeeding Webinar and Chat. My name is Nancy Holtzman. I'm a mom and baby nurse educator, board certified lactation consultant, and board certified in pediatrics. I'm the Vice President of Clinical Content and Online Learning here at IsisParenting. We have 4 centers in the Metro Boston area, 5 centers in the Dallas and Fort Worth area, and 4 beautiful new centers in the Atlanta, Georgia area. So please come visit us if you can. Spend time with us online if you're not close to one of our centers. And if you have friends and family in one of those states, please do refer them to ISIS. We appreciate that. As I said, with me today is Kate, and Kate is one of my favorite bloggers, and we go back about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. You can see her older son in the background, and I've met her when he was just a baby, working through some breastfeeding and other challenges. And now did he just turn 4?
3.
He just turned 3.
Yeah.
Okay. And here's a picture of Kate and Emmett when they were here about 2 months ago. He was just about 2 weeks old at the time. And tell us what we're seeing in this picture.
And this is us today, or this was us last weekend. My sister got married, and we flew both boys down to Philadelphia and had several days of family events, which meant lots of breastfeeding all over the place in whatever outfits we were wearing and with whatever props we had available. So this is me actually sitting at my sister's ceremony, nursing Emmett and trying to keep Owen from screaming through the entire thing, both of which were very successful.
Now, tell me, now that Emmett is 10 or 11 weeks old, how is the breastfeeding going, and how is it different from when you were working on breastfeeding Owen?
We are in a completely different world than I was when I was breastfeeding Owen. I think that there is hope out there for those who are having trouble with one baby, if you're ever going to have another baby, because it has been a completely different experience for me, having a different baby, and everything has gone better this time around. So when we were here, when Emmett was 2 weeks old, we were working through a lot of pain that I was having and trouble latching, not really sure if I had enough milk, and almost all of those things have improved in the last 8 weeks. Emmett can latch beautifully now on his own. I pretty much just point him in the right direction and he goes right to work. I still do have some questions about my own milk supply, but whenever I'm nursing him, he generally just does what he's supposed to do, and it works beautifully.
He is a beautiful chunk of monk. So what was his birth weight?
He was born 7 pounds 14 ounces.
And then did you have an 8-week, or when was your last pediatrician visit?
Was just maybe 2 weeks ago, and he was 11 pounds 11 ounces.
He's growing beautifully.
He is.
He looks fabulous, and you look fabulous.
Thank you.
I love when you have the the sort of the fat transfer. Not that you were ever chubby, but
it's true.
Where the extra padding that pregnancy really tries to ensure basically liquefies and turns into milk.
Amen. I'm happy to give it to him.
So, all right. So, Kate had sent me some questions yesterday, things that she wanted to chat about. So I just threw together a couple of slides. And tell me a little bit about where this question comes from and what you're asking here.
So Emmett is 11 weeks old, and I sort of began to realize yesterday that I hadn't really given much thought to how often I was feeding him. We got into a really good groove of just when he would wake up from his nap, I would feed him, and it kind of worked out to about every 2 hours, and we were both pretty happy with that. But as I'm thinking about going back to work in a few weeks, I remember back when my first son was a baby that by the time he went to daycare, he was probably only eating 3 bottles during the day. So he was eating every 3 or 4 hours. Whereas because the breastfeeding is going so well with Emmett, I kind of just feed him whenever. So I'm feeding more on demand, and I didn't know if there was a right time to start shifting the stretches longer between feedings, or if I need to be doing that at all. I sort of just don't know when we don't really have a schedule right now. I'm really just feeding him on demand, which is going to be harder for daycare to do.
Yep. So I initially thought about this as explaining about how breastfeeding works a little bit differently than bottle feeding, and also how it begins to benefit or impact the baby's sleep. But listening to you verbalize the question made me think a little bit about talking about the childcare and breastfeeding relationship as well. And for people that are listening that may have this interest, there is a full 20-minute webinar segment that exists that's called Childcare, Caregivers, and the Breastfeeding Relationship that covers this in great detail. But in a breastfeeding baby, there's generally not a lot of firm schedule, and that's normal. You breastfeed and the baby falls asleep, and then you sit on the couch and do your email or watch TV or read your iPad or do whatever you're going to do, and then 45 minutes or an hour and a half later, baby wakes up and you nurse them again. And that's pretty typical. And if you're driving to New York, the baby's going to sleep for 3 or 4 hours. And if you are trying to put your baby down at home so you can get stuff done, they're going to want to eat every 45 minutes because that's the way it goes. And when you have a breastfeeding baby and you're transitioning to childcare, they will give you the paperwork that they give everybody, and they give people with older babies, that says, what is your baby like? What doesn't your baby like? When does your baby nap? When does your baby eat? And they don't actually expect that you can answer those questions for a 10, 12, and 14-week-old baby. And in an infant room, they're very experienced. They know this. But over time, your baby actually will eat differently in childcare than he does at home. So if you are home, say from 7:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., you might breastfeed him 5 or 6 times during that time frame. Sometimes you might nurse him just for a couple of minutes to get him to fall asleep or to calm him down. Other times he may nurse and doze for 45 minutes, and you're just content to do that because you're dozing too. Whereas in childcare, he probably will eat 3 to 4 bottle feedings during that time frame. So he does not need to eat at the same time you would breastfeed him at home, and they will not be they will feed him on request or on demand, but it's going to be a little bit different. He's probably not going to eat an ounce or two here and an ounce or two there. He probably will gradually begin to eat 3 or 4 ounces at a feeding, and then that will hold him over for 2 or 3 hours, and then he'll eat another 3 ounces in the bottle, which is a little different than he eats at home. So there's that. And then when you are at work, if you're pumping at work, you don't need to pump at the exact same times that he would be eating if you were at home, and you don't need to match the times you pump with the times he's getting a bottle in childcare. But roughly that volume of milk should roughly equate. So he may eat 5 times between 7 and 5 p.m. if you were at home, but he'll eat smaller amounts more frequently. In childcare, he may condense those feedings to 3 or 3.5 or 4 feedings. And when you're at work, hopefully, if you are pumping at work, and we'll get to that question because I'm not entirely sure what your plans are, most moms will need to pump 3 times during a 10-hour separation. So if you have an 8.5-hour workday and then some commuting time on either side, if a mom's goal is to bring home all or most of the milk the baby needs for the next day at childcare, typically 3 times is for a young baby my recommendation in terms of how often to pump. But I did want to just say a little bit about stretching out the time of daytime feedings and what that means in terms of sleep, because I also think of this as a sleep question a little bit. And those of you that are familiar with our sleep webinars have seen these sleep plots, and I'm putting this here just to show you what you'll see in the next slide. So here's a blank one, and then these are the days of the week. So this is a week's worth of time going down here, and then these are the hours of the day. So from midnight to 9 a.m., 10 a.m., noon, and so on. And so the next slide, you'll see sleep consolidation. And again, this is the 24 hours of the day, and then this is the weeks going down here. And you can see how fragmented. So where it's colored black, the baby's sleeping, and where it's colored white, that's awake time. And you'll see how fragmented the early weeks are. But now, as you move into the 2nd and 3rd months, where this little guy is right now, what you're going to hope for is some uninterrupted consolidated sleep at the very beginning of the night, and then more discrete periods of being awake in the morning, and then this is the first morning nap, and then more awake time, and then a second nap, and then more awake time, and then a third nap. And notice when sleep gets more organized, the time between the third nap and the bedtime is the longest stretch of awake time. And then look at this, starting to get some really nice solid sleep here. So this might be from, say, 7 or 8 p.m. to midnight. So some nice uninterrupted sleep. Now, if you're hoping that your baby is going to start to sleep more at night, that means that they will be eating less at night. So you actually, it can be counterproductive to try to stretch out the times between feedings during the day, because if you're hoping to concentrate most of your baby's metabolic needs between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m., for example, that's when you want him to be able to take in most of his calories, so that gradually he needs fewer calories overnight. So I'm just going to make up a number here, but imagine he needs 7 feedings or 8 feedings in a 24-hour period. So if you can, if he's going to take 6 of those during the day, then that leaves 1 or 2 of them at night. If you try to stretch out the feedings during the day, so he ends up taking 5 feedings during that time frame, he may still need to be up more at night to eat more at night. So it can be counterproductive to try to stave a baby off. Not always, but usually moms do continue to feed the baby on request during the day, but the payoff you'll begin to see is that you're feeding less at night. Another thing you may recognize, which turns into the next question you have, is that where newborn feedings are very long and slow and drawn out and sometimes quite challenging, as your baby gets a little bit older and more experienced, the feedings may be quicker, more efficient. And sometimes moms are surprised because the baby will come on and latch, and then 5 or 7 minutes later, she's just settling into a feeding, and the baby is pushing away the breast and fussing, and mom's not sure what's going on. And really what's going on is maybe the baby's done. And sometimes moms will say, how can he get a full feeding in 10 minutes flat? But some babies really can. So they do become more efficient. And so even though he may still want to eat every 2 hours, it may not take an hour to feed him each time. Okay, so then that tied in with this question here, and maybe you can tell me a little bit about where this question's coming from.
Yeah, so and maybe it has to do with what you just started to discuss, which is the shorter feedings. But I have noticed he's often falling asleep or dozing off when he's eating, even though I feed him right after he wakes up. So he wakes up, changes diaper, start to feed him, and he'll probably go 10 minutes or so, and then he's either sort of disinterested or falling asleep. And if I can wake him up and keep him on task, he usually gets another letdown after that. But sometimes he's just kind of done before that. So then I'm wondering, is he done without that second letdown? Or can I switch him to the other side? Or should I just let him be done? But then if I am sort of trying to stretch out the feedings, I want to make sure that he's full after each one. So just ideas for when to know if he's actually done.
Yeah, you can switch from side to side. A good rule of thumb is finish the first breast first, but as your question, how do you know when he's finished? So when he's starting to get fussy, irritable, pulling on and off, squirming a lot, that's a good time to sit him up and burp him, and then you can put him back on that same breast, or you can offer him the other breast. And if, sometimes moms get over concerned about formilk, the foremilk and hindmilk imbalance, and it's all breast milk. So I don't think we need to overthink the foremilk and hindmilk imbalance. But if you do find that you are switching him from one breast to the other quickly, you can always put him back on the first breast again, and then you're sure that he is getting plenty of hind milk. I was interested in your comment over email that he falls asleep nursing, and then you put him down, and then he wakes up very quickly.
Yeah.
And you nurse him again, and he eats quite a bit more.
Yes, and this is especially at his bedtime when I'm actually trying to put him down.
Yeah, and see, I think I don't think it's quite as much about hunger, because I don't think that he eats and then lies down and 10 minutes later awakes because he's hungry. I think that he is not quite in a deep enough sleep stage, and and is needing help to fall asleep. And it's normal to nurse to fall asleep. Young babies, that's how they fall asleep. They fall asleep being, cuddled, moved, walked, but especially sucking or nursing. But depending on what your philosophies are around sleep, over the coming weeks, it may be useful to begin to separate feeding from falling asleep at bedtime, and then to begin. I know that I used to hear this all the time when my kids were little, and I would roll my eyes because I would, it never worked, yada yada. But put him down, drowsy but awake. But I can tell you now, really after 25 years of doing this, it's not a secret, but that is the secret to helping babies begin to sleep better at night. Not always reinforcing a sleep association so that the only way they can fall asleep is nursing at the breast or being in arms, bouncing on the physio ball or whatever. So that's a parent-controlled sleep association. Babies will move into a lighter sleep stage in the middle of the night, and if they are able to fall back asleep without that sleep association being recreated, that's how you begin to see a 5-hour stretch of sleep or a 7-hour stretch of sleep. No baby sleeps solidly for 7 hours. A 7-hour stretch means they've come lightly awake twice and they've put themselves back to sleep, whether by inching and squirming around, sucking their finger, thumping their legs, hanging out, talking to themselves, fussing a little bit. I'm not talking about crying.
Yeah.
But if they only can fall asleep nursing, then that's what they're going to need. And that's why we see a lot of moms calling at 4 and 5 and 6 months for sleep consults or breastfeeding consults, thinking that it's a breastfeeding issue because the baby is waking up more now and needs to nurse every 2 hours all night long in order to fall back asleep. So they think it's hunger, but actually it's a sleep association. So my thoughts for you are to consider when you are doing that nighttime feeding, maybe try nursing on 3 breasts. So you're moving him side to side, side to side. Use a lot of breast compression, which perks the baby up when he's feeding and can help an extra milk let down. See if you want to try some of those techniques like drowsy but awake. Make sure you've got loud white noise going. I put a picture of Ellen's little boy. She's in Dublin, and that's her gorgeous little guy in his Merlin sleep suit, because that's another thing that really can help. I think if he's mostly asleep and then he wakes up 10 minutes later and he's in light sleep, it's something like the Merlin can help a baby stay asleep longer or ease them into a deeper sleep. Some people will use a swaddle. Sometimes at 10 or 12 or 14 weeks, as babies begin to get bigger and they bust out of the swaddle or they fight the swaddles too much, then things like a Wombi or a Merlin, those types of swaddle transition products could be useful. So those are just some thoughts I had on that question. All right, and then you had another question.
Yeah, so I'm currently taking 2 different supplements to get my milk supply up just a little bit. I seemed for a few weeks there, and maybe it was when he was going through a growth spurt, I was just under what it seemed like he wanted to eat. And these 2 supplements together really did seem to make just the difference that I needed. I'm taking GoLacta and a Mother Love blend of fenugreek and a couple of other herbs. But my question was, do you sort of take them until you need them and then stop? Or do you take them and need to keep taking them to keep that level up?
Oh, well, like with many questions, the answer is, it depends.
Yeah.
And we'll get to your question or your situation about returning to work shortly, because I feel like if your milk supply is in a pretty good place right now, as you transition to returning to work, it's important to if you want to continue breastfeeding, it's important to keep your supply strong, both so that you can bring milk home for his next day at childcare, but just as importantly, because if your supply begins to decrease at the same time he begins to get easy, fast flow bottles, what you begin to see is the baby fussing at the breast and very cranky about nursing because he has to work harder to get less milk. And so that can become a downward spiral that leads to frustration on both sides and ultimately sometimes weaning. So, for you, it may or may not be critically important that he is exclusively breast milk fed, because I know you had mentioned that he gets the occasional bottle of formula. So you're a mom who doesn't feel too strongly that, that formula will never pass his lips. So if, for example, you came up 2 ounces short one day here and there, you maybe have milk in the freezer, or you maybe will offer him a couple of ounces of formula. That's your choice. But in addition to making sure that you have the breast milk for his bottles for childcare, in order to get that breast milk, it means that you're maintaining milk production by pumping. Because if you went back to work at 12 weeks and are pumping once a day for comfort, it may be over time. I mean, certainly you will not be able to bring home enough milk for childcare, but you could use 1 bottle of breast milk and 1 or 2 bottles of childcare of formula. But it may be that begins to impact your milk production to a point where he becomes very irritable about breastfeeding because he has to work harder to get less milk. So it could work for some people, but not for all people. And that's why I mentioned that. And where that ties into this question is, if you feel like you're in a good place in terms of milk production, I maybe wouldn't mess with it just yet. Now, if that weren't the situation, if you were just asking me this question in general, I would probably suggest to somebody, if they felt like they were tolerating Fenugreek or GoLacta or whatever it is that you're using, if you felt like it helped and you don't have any digestive issues or any tummy upset or anything like that, then sure, go ahead, continue. Why not? If you want to begin to taper it down, I would do a slow taper down and then just check, just see how you feel like your supply is doing. But whereas returning to work and switching from direct breastfeeding to some pumping is a big change for you, I maybe wouldn't mess with it at this moment, but maybe over a little bit over time. And then in general, it's hard to answer that question because the jury's out whether or not these supplements actually do help. I know that anecdotally, many moms think they do, and GoLacta even more so than Fenugreek. But for moms that are using medications, for example, to increase breast milk production, we do a very slow taper, and some moms, once they've been able to increase their milk production, can then maintain that higher level of production through breastfeeding and pumping. Other moms do find that it is dependent on the medication or the supplement, so it can be variable. Okay, so getting ready to return to work. I mentioned if you want to continue breastfeeding, the importance of maintaining strong milk supply, which is what's going to keep the baby interested and content to nurse at the breast despite getting bottles at childcare. And then also we can talk a little bit about how to bottle feed to protect the breastfeeding versus bottle feeding in ways that may sabotage breastfeeding. So I actually don't know what your thoughts and plans are in terms of going back to work, pumping, yes or no, and so on.
So I return to work in 3 weeks, and my plan, since breastfeeding is going very well, is to pump often during the day to hopefully make at least 90% of what he's drinking, which is sort of what we were doing for the last few weeks. So giving him a little bit of formula here and there when needed. I've already started to pump just at my own bedtime since he's going to bed earlier now, and I'm starting, I have like 12 ounces in the freezer, which feels like I'm getting a good start. I get about 2 ounces a night, so I put 2 of them together and make a 4-ounce baggie and put it in the freezer. But obviously, if I'm only getting 2 ounces of every time I pump, it's going to take a lot of pumping to make what he's drinking in a day. So I'm slightly nervous about being able to pump enough, but I work from home a lot, and my situation is such that I think I can pump whenever I need to make this happen. So I'm gonna see how it goes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's I'm going to see how it goes, and I'm going to try, and go into it with that mindset, I think is a good attitude. You know me, and people that are on the webinar know me, know that I work with lots and lots and lots of moms that are pumping, and there are lots of tricks and tips. So whether it is changing the pump or the cycling or the flange size, knowing about double pumping, hands-on, hands-free, using the hands-free bustier. I think you know a lot of that stuff already, but we can review that at another time. Or now the pump talk class is available online, and that would be a great thing for you to view as well. when you're pumping before you go to sleep, which is probably an hour or two after you feed him, and you're getting 2 ounces, that's not shabby, girlfriend.
Good.
But I do think that when you're back at work and you're pumping instead of breastfeeding, he's smiling up the storm at me, Mr. I wish this is where I wish you guys had cameras. His whole face is all smiling. I do think that you'll yield more than that.
Okay.
So,
Good.
as I mentioned, typically moms will pump 3 times during a work day. And hopefully that will produce all or most of the milk that you'll need for the very next day at childcare. So the stuff in your freezer is your insurance policy, it's your backup. But for the most part, the milk you pump on Monday will be the milk he eats on Tuesday, and the milk you pump on Tuesday is the milk for Wednesday, and so on. And then you may continue to pump once before you go to sleep, to be both, physically comfortable and to stash away that extra ounce or two. And some moms will pump once a day on the weekends, and some moms never want to look at that darn pump on the weekends, and just a lot of skin to skin and direct breastfeeding on the weekends. You don't need to practice with the bottles or replicate the childcare, pumping in bottles on the weekends. Heck no, there's enough practice 5 days a week. You're going back to work 5 full times.
I'm going back 4 days a week.
4 days,
Yeah.
good, yeah. So I think that will go well. Now I know from our conversation that you're using a childcare with an infant room, and different childcare offices, they state by state have different regulations. But in Massachusetts, the regulation is that any milk in a bottle that's not consumed an hour after it's been started needs to be discarded. So what that means is you want to keep your bottles small enough that he usually finishes them. And 4 ounces might be the right amount, or maybe it might be 3.
Yeah.
And I usually suggest starting to, and obviously the first days of childcare, you'll want to pack plenty of milk for him. But if you make the bottles too big, you'll end up losing milk. So it's probably better to make them the size that he typically finishes, and then just a little bit more, so maybe 3 or 3.5 ounces, whatever he typically takes. And then send a couple of snack packs. And a snack pack is just like a little extra, 1 ounce or 2 ounces, because if he plows through a bottle and he still seems hungry, rather than them reaching for another 3-ounce bottle, of which he drinks only a third of and they throw the rest away, then they can just give him another ounce of milk. Or if you're due to pick him up at 5:30 and it's 5 o'clock and he's screaming, they can give him an ounce of milk to kind of hold him over till you get there. So that's, I like this picture because this picture shows a pretty typical day at childcare for a 12-week-old baby, which is, three feedings of 3 to 4 ounces, and then a snack pack is pretty typical. And then bottle feeding to protect the breastfeeding, slow flow. And just because a baby begins to age out, if your slow flow nipple says 0 to 3 months and he's now 16 weeks, it doesn't mean you need to move to faster flow nipple. It really should take 15 to 30 minutes to do a bottle feeding, not 7 or 10.
And can you use nipples from several years ago? Like, do they go bad? Could I use my 3-year-old's nipples?
Unlike the bottles, the nipples themselves do wear and tear. They do wear out with time. But the ones you have, inspect them, and if they're if they're not cracked, the holes sometimes split a little bit. So as long as they look fine, they're fine. And you can check a flow rate of a bottle if you're not sure between one brand or another. Is one faster or slower? Not all nipples that say they're slow flow actually are. And the best way to check is not to put water in the bottle and turn it upside down, but to put water in the bottle and try to drink out of it yourself. And you can compare 2 or 3 different brands or bottle nipples, and you will easily tell which one is a slow flow. But a good rule of thumb is it should take 15 to 30 minutes to drink a bottle. And we talk about that paced, upright, responsive bottle feeding position where the bottle is coming in almost horizontal. But you can't control what position a child care provider feeds your baby. You can make requests and ask them, and they'll nod and say yes, yes, yes. But in real life, who knows? If they have to feed 2 babies at the same time, they'll put them both in bouncer seats and so on. So what you can control is the amount of milk you're putting in the bottle, but most importantly, the flow rate of the nipple, because that same 3 ounces of milk given over 25 minutes is going to be so much more enjoyable for him than if he knocks it down in 7 minutes and he'll still be fussing for more because he needs time to be interacted with and cuddled and rocked and fed, right? He's talking. I hope you can hear him in the background. All right, let's see. It's 12:30. Hillary is in the background, but I know she needs to run to a meeting. So thank you, Hillary. You can log off if you need to. And I'm going to answer these 3 or so questions, and then we'll say goodbye. So let's see. Here's a mom who says she's going back to work, and baby's in full-time childcare, is pumping exactly 4 ounces each session. How and when will I get more ounces as she grows? I read she won't necessarily need more ounces since the quality of milk changes. Baby's 13 weeks. Sounds familiar to some of the things we were talking about. And the childcare wants to feed her every 2 to 3 hours. That doesn't allow for enough milk. Isn't okay to have eat, play, sleep theme and have her times vary throughout the day. So as much as I don't, want to put babies on rigid schedules. No, but every 2 to 3 hours is is typically the type of a routine that most babies in that age group will gravitate toward in childcare. And that's because childcare is a lot more routine building than life at home with mom, because it really depends on the day of the week, whether you're home or whether you're at a playgroup or whether you're doing errands. Is it sunny? Then you're outside. Is it rainy? Then you're inside, and so on. Whereas childcare, it's a similar routine each day, and the babies really do begin to build routines. So they will start over time napping at roughly around the same times, and so on. And so being fed every 2 to 3 hours in childcare seems reasonable to me. I'm sure that if your baby were very irritable and fussy and clearly hungry, they would feed her sooner. But I think that over time she will settle into a pattern of feeding every 2 to 3 hours. And 4 ounces also is a generous but reasonable amount. And you're correct. She may not really need much more than that. If you find that you're pumping, you're bringing home the 12 ounces from childcare, but over time she needs 15 or 18 ounces, you may add an extra pumping session in, or you may begin to pump one more time before you go to sleep, or you may add an additional pumping after breastfeeding on the weekends. And then starting around 5 to 6 months, you can begin dabbling in solid food, which isn't going to make a huge difference in terms of your baby's metabolic intake, but it does give the childcare provider a sense of relief that there's something other than the milk you're leaving that they can offer to the baby. So it sounds like you're doing great, and congratulations. And I will post the link to the Pump Talk class and the childcare caregivers and breastfeeding relationship webinar as well. Here's this adorable boy. I want to thank you again for coming and sharing your experiences. This is kind of a fun ongoing project that we had you at 2 weeks and now at 2 months. When can we have you back?
2 more, 6 more, whatever you want. Yeah, well, we're happy to come back. I get all of my breastfeeding questions answered in person by my favorite breastfeeding specialist, so we're happy to do it. Well,
we'll definitely have you come back. And then, of course, I'll be very excited to have you come back around 5 to 6 months, and we'll talk about beginning to introduce solid foods. That's always a very fun topic. Introducing cups for fun and play, water in cups just for fun, and starting some solid foods and all of the different options. I call it 50 shades of gray when it comes to solid foods, because it's so conflicting. Do you start at 4 to 5 months or 5 to 6 months? Do you start with cereal? Do you start with vegetables? Do you do baby-led weaning, which just means you hand your kid a pork chop and let them go to town? Or there's just so many options, and the research is confusing. It conflicts one another, and it's very contrary to what we were teaching for the last 20 years. So who the heck knows? So we'll talk about it. Thank you, everybody, for coming today, and share the joy. And let's see, on Tuesday, the sleep webinar, we're going to talk about grandparents, what grandparents need to know about baby sleep, and sign up for our newsletters, like us on Facebook. And there's Brooks, our buddy Brooks, and follow us on Twitter, because this is how I am judged, people. And here is our friend Kate, her blog, which I didn't promote enough, but it is my favorite blog because it's just daily life and beautiful, beautiful photos. And I really like it. And you can follow her on Twitter so that you can see when there are new blog posts, essentially is the case. All right, so thanks everybody, and I will see you on Tuesday for the sleep webinar and back again on Thursday for breastfeeding. Have a great week, everyone.